All right. So this is going to be part 2 of chapter 3. I'm going to try to finish this part. That'll be chapter 4 of part 1. And then I think after chapter 4... Oh yeah, okay, so after chapter 4, we'll go on to part 2. Alright. The role of victims' lawyers. A major force distorting public perception of the church is the professionals, victims, advocates, and the church suing lawyers who work with them. Some of the latter write checks to some of these outfits, which supply them with clients. Victims have rights, of course, but many of those who are professionally advocate on their behalf seem to have an agenda, or at least an interest that transcends the victim's welfare. Most sexual abuse of minors take place in the homes. Boyfriends of their mothers and stepfathers are most often the perpetrators of this crime, but they do not have deep pockets, so many lawyers who pursue civil cases have no interest in them. Why bother with them when frying the big fish, the Catholic Church, promises to be more lucrative? When the Child Victims Act was passed in New York in 2019, it established 1-year look-back provisions that allowed victims to file suit regardless how long ago the offense allegedly occurred. Although the law applied to the private and public sectors alike, it was clear from the marketing copy on various lawyers and law firms' websites that many were trying to attract those victimized by the Catholic priests. No one was more anxious to focus on them than the law firm of Jeff Anderson. Anderson has become increasingly rich, suing the expletive out of the Catholic Church, as he likes to put it. Expletive. Seemingly full of hatred for the Church, he is known for publishing the names of the accused priests whose cases have never been evaluated, and in which no details are given. This led Ed Forbes, senior director for the news engagement for the USA Today network Northeast, to condemn him for trafficking and accusations that lack any obvious standard for being made public. The journalist said he would not publish his name listed by Anderson. When Anderson, who once called himself a dedicated atheist, issued his report on the diocese in Illinois, he accused him of keeping secret files on accused priests. But as the special counsel of the Archdiocese of Chicago said, this was false. All the names were reported to the authorities. The lawyer, John O'Malley, was further incensed with Anderson for portraying as perpetrators those who have been investigated and cleared. Citing one case, O'Malley said, "Police didn't decide he was a perpetrator. The Archdiocese did not. The Archdiocese did not. Jeff Anderson did. People are entitled to their reputations until proven otherwise." Lawyers for other dioceses made similar criticisms the way Anderson proceeded. Sorry. Anderson is hardly working alone in showing contempt for the reputation of priests who have been accused but never found guilty. Mitchell Garabedian, who was featured in the movie Spotlight about the Archdiocese of Boston, was ripped by Brian McGrory of the Boston Globe for what he did to Father Charles Murphy, a priest who Garbedian twice sued. In 2006, Father Murphy was sued for improperly touching a minor. It was a woman who claimed that the incident had occurred 25 years earlier. The priest maintained his innocence, and on that eve of the trial, the woman dropped her suit. In 2010, Father Murphy was sued by a man who alleged that the priest had fondled him 40 years earlier. As it turned out, the accuser was deep in debt, and his credibility was challenged by his own family members. The priest was exonerated after the Archdiocese Review Board took 6 months to examine the charges. Father Murphy died in 2011, a broken man. McGregory said that what Garabedian was a disgrace. When I read his story, I called Garabedian to question him about it. I simply asked if he had any regrets for pressing charges about Father Murphy. The framed lawyer went ballistic, screaming at the top of his lungs. He bellowed that he lost the case because of the Archdiocese kangaroo court. I asked him to calm down and speak rationally, but instead he made sweeping condemnations of Boston priests. In 2013, a Missouri man made allegations against a priest who allegedly molested him and 3 other altar boys in the early 1980s. 2 of the 3 altar boys were dead, and the one still living said that none of the abuse ever occurred. I investigated the accuser and found he had been implicated in a murder, although another man was convicted in public record that the priest accuser had motive to commit the murder and the opportunity to do so. I took this information from court records and found on the internet. Yet the accuser required services of the church suing attorney Rebecca Randalls. She often works with Jeff Anderson, and sued me for defamation. 4 years later, after the case wound its way through the courts, the Eighth Circuit United States Court of Appeals ruled in favor of me and the Catholic League by dismissing all claims in the lawsuit, including the defamation claim. It was a harassment lawsuit from the beginning. I never defamed anyone. I was ably represented by Aaron Mercino, who worked at the time of the Thomas More Law Center and now serves on the board of directors in the Catholic League. Oof. The role of victim advocates. BishopAccountability.org tracks clergy sexual abuse by aggregating news articles and published reports. In August 2019, it posted 4 stories on Father Joe Townsend from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I posted another one in October. Father Townsend had been put on administrative leave in July when it was alleged that he had acted inappropriately while an associate pastor in St. Pius X Catholic Church from 1988 to 1991. He denied the accusations of sexual misconduct and no criminal charges were ever brought. In December, the diocese cleared him altogether after the media published reports of Father Townsend had been exonerated. BishopAccountability.org did also, although not before the Catholic League, but the damage had already been done to the priest's reputation. BishopAccountability.org says that it simply publishes the names of the accused priests whose cases are being examined and does not confirm the veracity of allegations. But where it is accountability for But where is the accountability for the harm done to the innocent clergy? The group also condemns dioceses that do not publish names of accused priests, even though no institution lists accused employees, and demands the names of accused deceased priests. What is it trying to accomplish? One can only guess when BishopAccountability.org criticized the second of the two John Jay reports on clergy sexual abuse before it was issued. Worse, Terence McKiernan, founder and president of the BishopAccountability.org, accused Cardinal Timothy Dolan of keeping the lid on 55 names of predator priests without providing proof. My emails to McKiernan asked him to identify the priests have all gone unanswered. In December 2013, Father Michael O'Connell stepped down. Father Michael O'Connell stepped down after allegations that he had abused a minor 20 years earlier were made. The Chicago priest said he had never met the accuser. In April 2014, a police investigation could not substantiate the accusation, and Father O'Connell was reinstated. Both the Cook County Sheriff Police and the Archdiocese of Chicago's Independent Review Board concluded that the charges against him were unfounded. Everyone was happy for Father O'Connell except the Survivors Network of those abused by priests, SNAP. We have met this victim and find him very credible, said the professional victims advocates. Barbara Blaine, founder and president, said that it leaves children at risk to have Father O'Connell back in ministry. She has no evidence that the police or the review board were wrong. She relied wholly on her impressions of the accuser. This is standard operating procedure for these loose associations of victim advocates. For them, apparently, accused priests do not deserve to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, as are others suspected of a crime. If the accuser seems to be telling the truth, they seem to fail to consider what would happen if our system of justice if the presumptions of innocence were removed from everyone and people were punished on the basis of accusations only. No one can know for certain what motives another person, but it appears that some victims advocates are hurt and confused people who are not simply concerned with bringing abusers to justice. Until he was discredited, David Clohessy was the face of SNAP. While in that role, he was an unrelenting critic of the church's handling of clergy sexual abuse. Yet he refused to turn in one particular accused priest to the authorities, his brother, Kevin Clohessy. From early on, Clohessy said, the raging debate which within me was, he's my brother, he's an abuser. Do I treat him like my brother, or do I treat him like an abuser? It seems unaware that some bishops might have been similarly torn when confronted with the accusation against one of their brother priests. Of course, this can only be an example of in-group favoritism, a common phenomenon. Father Clohessy was ordained in 1985, and it didn't take long before stories about his conduct made the rounds in the Diocese of Jefferson City, Missouri. He developed a reputation for plying adolescent males with booze and molesting them. David Clohessy was alerted to his brother's homosexual predations early on, but kept them to himself. A reporter for the Boston Globe asked him if he knew any whistleblowers. He identified Donna Cox. This was risky. After all, as a youth minister in the late 1980s and early 1990s, where his brother worked, she had learned of Father Clohency's conduct. So David Clohency told the reporter that Cox might mention his brother and asked that he not be named. The reporter said it was unlikely that his name would be published, but a month later, when the diocese named Father Clohency, the Globe did too, in another story. David Clohency's own travails with the church began in 1991 when he filed a lawsuit against the Diocese of Jefferson City, claiming he was sexually abused by a priest between 1969 and 1973 from the ages 12 to 16. The suit was dismissed because it fell outside of the statutes of limitation. What took him so long to file the suit? He said he had no memory of what happened until 1998. What happened then? He said that he and his fiancée were watching Barbara Streisand movie Nuts when his memory was jarred. After tracking Snap for years, he had serious doubts for its veracity. I decided to do some investigating. In 2011, I asked the ex-CIA agent and her husband to attend a Snap conference near Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. I have written about her account, and it is riveting. There were approximately 110 to 130 people in attendance. All were white, and most were women in 50s and 60s. These recurring themes at conference was the evil nature of the Catholic Church. The word evil was used repeatedly to describe the institution. Garabedian said, "The immoral entity, the Catholic Church, should be defeated. We must stand up and defeat this evil." Father Thomas Doyle, the canon leader who has been involved in multiple clergy abuse cases, said the Catholic Church was founded by Constantine, not Jesus. He said that the Mass equals magic words. He called priestly vestments dresses. Then came the shakedown. Although Anderson said that the lawsuits against the church have not been about money, he conducted a fundraiser appeal for Snap, matching dollar for dollar at any donation. But he drew the line when the attorney offered to donate $10,000. David Clohency instructed the crowd about how to manipulate the media. He told the attendees that if they sued the church, they should hold a press conference outside a chancery or a police station. Holding it outside a chancery makes it easy for reporters because they need to go one location to interview both the claimant and the diocese public relations person. But talk is not enough, Clancy added. Display holy childhood photos, they said. If you don't have a compelling childhood photos, we can provide you with photos of other kids that can be held up for the cameras. And interviews. Use feeling words such as "I was scared," "I was suicidal," and use the words "kids" as often as possible, he advised. Be sad and not mad. Clohency succeeded in the helm of Snap for a long time because what he said was music to the ears of the church's critics, and many people, including the Catholics, thought he was the victim's best friend. Snap started its descent in 2012. 5 years later, it imploded. At the end of 2011, a Missouri judge ordered Clohency to be deposed in a case involved Father Michael Tierney, a priest in the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph, Missouri. He was accused in 2010 of sexually abusing a male in 1971. His lawyers asked for Snap's internal documents, and the judge ordered Clohency to produce 23 years worth of them. The lawyers wanted to see if Snaps had been coaching alleged victims and plaintiffs to say they had been repressed their memories of abuse. The judge says that Clohensey almost certainly had knowledge that this was relevant to Father Tierney's case. The lawyer hold on. Okay. The judge said that Clohessy almost certainly had knowledge that was relevant to Father Tierney's case. The lawyer for the accuser was Rebecca Randalls. On January 2nd, 2012, Clohessy took a stand. When asked if he identified himself as a rape counselor, he said, "I don't know." When he asked if he had any training as a rape counselor, okay. When asked if he had any training as a rape crisis counselor, he said he did not. Yet he had been counseling alleged victims for a living, even though he lacked a degree in counseling and never had any formal classes in this field. When asked if his colleague Barbara Blaine was a licensed counselor, he said he did not know. She has a master's degree in social work. In fact, no one at SNAP was a licensed counselor. Yet that is the service they offered. When they asked where the counseling took place, Clohessy said, "We meet people wherever they want to meet, in Starbucks, at, wherever people feel comfortable, that's where we meet." When asked how much their $3 million budget is spending on counseling, he said he did not know. Clohessy said that SNAP had a business address, but he didn't know the zip code. Having no office, he worked out of home, and in St. Louis area, he personally fielded phone calls from alleged victims. "Individuals call me, and they share their pain with me," he says. "I console them, and I may be on the phone with them for an hour." Then the lawyers asked Clohessy, "You won't tell us the sources of your funding, is that correct?" Clohessy agreed that it was correct. The question was asked because SNAP had been accused of being greased by lawyers such as Anderson and Garabedian for years. What does SNAP do with this money? In 2007, it spent a total of $593 for survivor support. The following year spent $92,000 on travel. Apparently, Clohessy knew the next to nothing about his staff. Besides Blaine, he said, "We have an administrative person who is new," he said. He could remember only her first name. He also said he has a fundraising person, but confessed, "I don't know the spelling of her last name." When asked who was responsible for SNAP's website, he said, "I don't know." The most revealing comment Clohessy made was in response to the following question: "Has SNAP, to your knowledge, ever issued a press release that contained false information?" He said, "Sure." 2 months after Clohessy was deposed, Lori Goodstein of the New York Times called me to ask him about his comments. I honed in on his administration that he lies to the media. She says she was unaware of that. I asked if she had a copy of the deposition handy, and she did. When I pointed out the page number and where to find the remark, she sounded surprised, as if the remark was a regrettable mistake. In her article, she mentioned that Clohessy had been asked about falsehoods in SNAP releases, and his answer was sure. But then she allowed him to walk it back. She had called him out on this, and then he said his response was he had been an acknowledgement that there must have been some errors in 1,000 news releases and alerts that the group has sent out over the years. She quoted him, saying, "But I never intentionally and never mistakes of substance." But the question was not about errors or mistakes. It was about information he released to the media that he knew to be false. I doubt Goodstein would allow a defender of the church to walk back a comment that made him look bad. Further proof that she is not a non-participant in this matter was given later that year when HBO released a documentary, Mia Maxima Culpa: Silence in the House of God. Goldstein not only appeared in the film, which is at very least unfair to the church, but also was an associate producer along with Jeff Anderson. After con- after com- after commending Goldstein's article in which he quoted Clohessian, the New York Times portrayed him as a victim of aggressive legal tactics, saying it was the duty of the judge to reject unfairly burdensome discovery requests. The brazenness of the newspaper is astounding, and never accused a church-suing lawyer such as Anderson, Randalls, or Garabedian of using aggressive legal tactics. In January 2017, a former SNAP employee, transgender Gretchen Rachel Hammond, sued Clohessy, Blaine, and Barbara Doris, the outreach director, offering the testimony, if true, proved everything I had been saying about the outfit's corruption and dishonesty for decades. Indeed, when Hammond met the Bernadette Bernadette Brandy Egan, the Catholic League's vice president, and the police analyst Don Lawyer at our New York City headquarters. I wasn't sure if she had some other agenda, so I declined to meet with her. She said she was aware of my criticisms of Snap when she took the job. But she was aware of my criticisms of Snap when she took the job, but was not persuaded. She changed her mind after seeing their operation firsthand. Hammond, who had been Snap's director of development, claimed that in the lawsuit that Snaps routinely accept financial kickbacks from attorneys in the forms of donations. In return, Snap refers survivors as political clients to attorneys who then file lawsuits on behalf of the survivors against the Catholic Church. The case is often settled to financial benefit of the attorneys and at times to the financial health of SNAP, which has received direct payments from survivor settlements. The suit listed one donation after another made by plaintiffs' attorneys to SNAPs, which made up the lion's share of funds collected by Clohessy and Company in any given year. For example, in 2008, a Minnesota lawyer, possibly Anderson, contributed 55%, $414,140 of Snap's total donation for the year. 3 years later, he contributed over 40% of its total revenue. The lawsuit also claimed that Snaps funneled money to itself via dummy organization, telling at one time during 2011 and 2012, it said Snap even concocted a scheme to have attorneys make donations to a front foundation styled in the Minnesota Center for Philanthropy, and then have the Minnesota Center for Philanthropy make a grant to Snap in order to provide subterfuge for and to otherwise conceal the plaintiff's attorney kickback to Snap. Hammond claimed that Snap's officials were more concerned about the ranking of the dough than the serving of the interests of their clients. The lawsuit cites an email exchange between Snap's officials discussing a subpoena that was issued to them. One of them asked if he should mention the subpoena to the newsletter. It may profit more donations, said the person who replied, even though, on the other hand, it will also upset more survivors. Blaine responded, my initial response that we err on the side of using it to raise money. Hammond's suit alleged that Snap does not focus on protecting or helping survivor. It exploits them. It further claims that Snap callously disregards the real interests of survivors, using them instead as props and tools in furtherance of Snap's own commercial fundraising goals. Instead of recommending that survivors pursue what is their best personal, emotional, and financial interests, Snap pressures survivors to pursue costly and stressful litigations against the Catholic Church, all in order to further Snap's own publicity and fundraising interests. According to the lawsuit, the people involved with SNAP are motivated by hostility towards the Catholic Church. While SNAP claims it is motivated by the interest of survivors, the lawsuit says in fact SNAP is motivated largely by the personal animus of its director and officers against the Catholic Church. For example, Clohessy recommended that alleged victims pursue a claim against the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, saying every nickel it doesn't have is money that can't be spent on defense lawyers. PR staff, gay bashing, contraceptive battling, executive, etc. Hammond said that when she confronted SNAP officials about its activities, she was subjugated to retaliatory action, which caused her stress and depression, resulted in health problems. That is the reason she sued, she said, and also for the loss of wages after SNAP fired her in 2013. Hammond named Clohessy in the lawsuit, and he resigned as SNAP's director. In an interview with National Catholic Reporter, he said that he had information the organization board, which he had informed the organization's board of his decisions months before the lawsuit was filed, implying that the two events were unrelated. But SNAP announced his departure only afterwards. Blaine, the founder of SNAP, also resigned. Road to Recovery is another victims group that ran into problems in the summer of 2019. Catholic's news agency CNA ran a two-part series on a man they chose to identify as Michael. That's not his real name. Middle-aged man who chose to remain anonymous. He told a story about being abused and about his dealings with both SNAP and Road to Recovery. In fall 2019, I met with him along with Barnadette Brady Egan and Rick Hinshaw, our communications director at the time, and asked him about a number of issues. He is a well-educated man and a professional success. What he experienced is incredible. I invited him to share his story by publishing it to the Catholic League journal, Catalyst, which he did. What follows is taken from that story, the CNA series, and my interview with him. Michael's problems began when he was 15 years old, when he claimed he was sexually abused by Father James Rapp at his Catholic high school. Ugh. 7 years later, he said when he was 22, he told a priest in confession that he had been molested. The problem was that I didn't know who the priest behind the confessional screen was an active homosexual. So I confessed to him, and he offered to help me. I didn't know I was being solicited. For 18 months, the priest counseled him, but also subjugated Michael to lewd homosexual conversation and harassment. He admits that in his situation it was complicated. The priest counseling him did help, and since he was preparing for medical school, he thought he could weather these solicitations. I became dialed into my faith like never before, Michael said. Attended Mass and praying on my knees every night. It seemed to be recovering, but all that ended in one night when he phoned me, ostensibly drunk, blurting out the most appalling sexual propositions. It was truly devastating. After that night, I could no longer sit through Mass. I left the church, vowing I would never speak about my abuse again. Decades later, he received professional counseling. He had post-traumatic stress disorder and was suffering from severe anxiety. The good news is that he improved and returned to the church. In 2010, when Michael was in his 40s, he learned about SNAP and Road to Recovery. He sought to learn more about the priest who abused him. He reached out to Robert Hodson, the former priest and founder of the Road to Recovery. When they corresponded by email, the first thing Hodson asked him was whether he needed an attorney. Michael was taken back, but the two of them hit it off, and under Hodson's influence, Michael filed a suit against the church and was able to recoup some of the money he had spent on counseling. He also left the church for the second time. I drew the line when Hodson encouraged me to get my children out of the church, he said. Hodson introduced Michael to Garabedian at SNAP conference in Chicago. When Michael asked about the relation, Hodson said, Mitch takes good care of me. That was one of many revelatory moments Michael would ever encounter at the conference. He shared one that put a smile on my face. He said that he learned the conference and how much I hated. He said that he learned at the conference how much I was hated by the SNAP crowd. SNAP proclaims to be a support group for survivors, Michael said, but what I experienced was anything but support for the survivors. SNAP invited the shark attorney, used the victims like chum, and watched the frenzy unfold. I saw Jeff Anderson, the mega sex abuse plaintiff attorney, giggling and excitedly prance around the conference to funnel money to SNAP. He also met Patrick Wall, another ex-priest who pledged to victims. He told Michael he was an attorney working for Anderson. My heart sank. Michael said, my eyes welled up in tears. I went to the SNAP conference to get better, and I hoped they would help. But all I saw was SNAP aligning victims with the attorney for money and to weaponize victims against the church. Michael met Clohessy in the hotel lobby. He knew Clohessy had authored an article about his abuser and wanted to know more about him. When he asked, Michael wrote he couldn't remember writing the article. He couldn't give me information about my abuser at that. How could someone write an article and not remember a single thing about it? Clohessy apologized but never offered to help him. After the conference, Gretchen Rachel Hammond successfully sued SNAP, and Michael was delighted. He was further emboldened when on December 23rd, 2017, he experienced a remarkable and unexpected reversion to the Catholic faith. One might have thought everyone would be happy after that, but Hodson wasn't. This was not a surprise given that the priest had previously told Michael that it would be good for his whole family to quit the church. The two did not communicate much after that, but there was an important exchange that took place once the Pennsylvania grand jury report was released in August 2018. Hodson sent Michael his press release on the subject. He said that homosexuals don't rape minors, predators rape minors. When he went on to say the Catholic Church should embrace homosexual and transgender priests, this didn't sit well with Michael, given his experience. He came to the conclusion that there's an ongoing agenda to cover up homosexual nature of the abuse crisis. As we shall see, his observation is supported by the evidence. Let's stop right there. That's the end of chapter 3.